Hello everyone, my name is Jason and I am an ISFP. You are watching my ISFP journey. Thank you for watching. Please consider subscribing if you have not already done so. And if you are benefiting from this YouTube channel, would you please consider clicking on the link in the description that would give you an opportunity to donate financially to what I'm doing. I would greatly appreciate that. So in this video, I want to talk a little bit about single perceiver, or as objective personality calls them, single observer freakouts. So let me just tell you real fast what I'm talking about when I say a single perceiver or single observer. IJs and EPs have at their as their first function a perceiving function, or objective personality calls them an observing function. So they either have sensing or intuition as their first function. But that means that they have the opposite of it as their fourth function. And we hear, I think, a lot of times in MBTI concepts that that all people are excellent or excel at their first function, that they're extremely strong at their first function. And I would beg to differ a little bit. I think that we are addicted to our first function. I think that we use our first function nonstop and in basically an almost unconscious manner. However, to say that we're good at it would mean that we use it well. Here's the problem with that. I think to do anything well, you need to do it with balance. And we do not use our first functions with balance. We use it in a very imbalanced way. We are addicted to our first function. We go sort of crazy with our first function. We run everything through the process of our first function, and yet without the balance that the fourth function would, could, and should bring if it were stronger. Now, if we contrast that with our middle two functions, we tend to be very balanced with our middle two functions, and therefore, I would argue that we are actually better with our second and third functions than we are with our fourth. Not because we do them more, not because we venerate them to the degree that we, sort of honor and worship that first function, but because when we use our second and third functions, we use them in a much more balanced way, and therefore we're actually using them with skill. Whereas with our first function, we're just sort of going over the ledge, crazy with it, and often ignoring the fourth function that would bring it balance so that we could use it well. So single observers or single perceivers, those who have sensing or intuition as their first function and therefore the opposite of it as their fourth function, while they may use that sensing or intuition in a sort of nonstop way and in an addicted way, they don't necessarily use it well because it's not balanced. So in this video, I want to talk about specifically how that comes out in ESTPs and ESFPs, and I'll look at some of the other types as well in other videos. ESFPs and ESTPs have as their first function extroverted sensing. So that means that they have as their inferior or fourth function introverted intuition. Now, how does that come out? Well, extroverted sensing is all about gathering in and experiencing the physical world. So it's taking in all of the sights and sounds and experiences and observations about the physical world that can possibly be taken in. Now, we all do that. We all take in observations of the physical world. But extroverted sensing places an extremely high priority on that process of taking in the external world, the physical world, and it also sees the physical world as being so unmovable, so real, it is everything to an extent that matters, and therefore going behind what we see in the physical world to look for the meaning behind what's out there, to look for the patterns of what we're seeing, to be able to take a bit of data from this experience and a bit of data from this experience and put them together and say, okay, I see some commonality, I see a pattern, or I can make sense of that. Well, that's what the introverted intuition is designed to do. It's the introverted intuition that finds the commonalities in all of the data that is gathered in from the physical world, and then creates patterns and comes to conclusions. So extroverted sensing brings in the data, and introverted intuition makes sense of it. Introverted intuition says, okay, I've seen this before, and I've seen this before, and I've seen this before. Therefore, I can see some patterns, I can see some commonalities, I can make sense, and I can draw logical conclusions about what I'm experiencing, about what I'm seeing, based on what I've experienced before. Well, for someone like an ISFP or an ISTP, or someone even who has NI as their second function and SE as their third function, this is going to be a relatively balanced process. The ability to take in data from the physical world and then find the patterns, find the meaning behind it, and draw logical conclusions from the data that is gathered. That is going to be a balanced process for ISFPs, ISTPs. However, for the ESFP and the ESTP, it's not going to be a very balanced process. So what they're going to be doing is gathering in all this, overwhelming amount of data from the physical world. But because their NI is relatively weak, if they don't train it, if they don't make it a point to develop it, their NI will be relatively weak, and therefore they will struggle to find the meaning in all of the data. They will struggle to find the commonalities, the patterns. They will struggle to draw logical conclusions about the physical world that they're experiencing. So what is that going to look like, or how might that come out in an ESFP or an ESTP? Well, an ESFP or an ESTP might be prone to jump to conclusions that cannot be supported by the data that is found in the physical world. So let me give you some examples of that. Let's say that an ESFP or an ESTP hears about an electrical fire that was caused because of poor wiring in a home somewhere, okay? Well, that ESFP or ESTP might take that one bit of data about the electrical fire, and they might even hear the details that go with it and absorb those details and whatnot. But instead of necessarily factoring in the commonalities of all of the buildings that human beings go in all of the time that have multiple electrical wires, outlets, light switches, so on and so forth, that never catch on fire, that never have a problem, the ESFP or the ESTP may fail to see the pattern of, generally speaking, electrical fires don't happen. Now, it's always wise to be prepared. It's always wise to make that observation. I observed that electrical fires can happen, and therefore I ought to take reasonable steps and logical logical measures to prevent it from happening in my home or in the buildings in which I frequent. Okay. But they may fail to consider that pattern, and they may just sort of see the one incident and say, oh my gosh, this could happen. And it could breed a little bit of a paranoia. In one ESTP that I know, they might hear about a car wreck and take in the data of how that car wreck happened, and then sort of almost go overboard, sort of worrying that the exact same thing will happen, instead of, sort of considering, okay, that was a situation that really happened, but it was a relatively unlikely situation, and there's no reason to necessarily spend significant amounts of one's day being paranoid or worrying about that happening. Yes, prepare, but maybe you don't need to be panicky about the idea that this could happen to you. Extroverted sensing is really good at pulling in all of this data from the physical world. But if your introverted intuition is weak, then you're not going to be able to necessarily see the patterns or make sense of it. And that could lead you, if you're an ESFP or an ESTP, to sort of an anxiety or a paranoia or a worry about the way that things will turn out, because you're sort of unable to put it all together. I like to think of it as sort of working a puzzle without having the box lid. The extroverted sensing person can see every single piece, right? But intuition dominant people, especially if they have intuition at the top and sensing at the bottom, may actually fail to see all the pieces. But extroverted sensing dominant people are going to see all of the puzzle pieces. You know, they're looking on the table and they're seeing it all. But because they don't have the box lid with the picture, they just really have trouble or struggle figuring out how it all fits together and making sense of it. It's just a massive mess of information, of data, so on and so forth. But when you, as an ESFP or an ESTP, work on building your introverted intuition, then you can get to the point where you can see the box lid. You can start to really make sense of it all and say, okay, yes, it's true. I heard about this one incident, or I've heard 2 times that this type of thing happened, but the reality of the situation shows me I don't need to panic. I don't need to worry. I don't need to spend all of my time freaking out about the idea that this might happen to me, because it was a rare incident and the overarching pattern of all of the physical data that I'm gathering in says it's not likely to happen to me. Yes, I'll prepare. Yes, I'll be wise. Yes, I'll try to make good decisions that don't lead me down a stupid path. But overall, I don't need to lay awake at night worrying about an electrical fire, worrying about a home invasion, worrying about a car wreck, worrying about these things happening to me, because the overarching pattern of reality, if I would just connect the dots, is or shows me that these incidents are actually quite rare. I hope that you found this helpful. The point that I'm really trying to drive home is that with every one of us, we can be so all in on our quote, dominant or first function, that we do not use the inferior or fourth function to balance it out so that we can actually use that first function effectively. And so I just kind of wanted to show how that looks in just 2 types that I picked, ESFP and ESTP. The principles that I'm talking about in this video are true of every type. Every one of you, no matter what type you are, runs the very realistic risk. In fact, it's more than a risk. You probably actually do it, of being so all in on that first function that you don't develop your inferior function to balance it out. And therefore, you really aren't good with your first function, because while you may use it constantly, it's imbalanced and you're not using it to its greatest effectiveness because you're using it in such an imbalanced way. Thank you for watching. If you found this useful, do please hit like. Also, do please subscribe. I would appreciate that. And again, if you would like to donate to what I'm doing here, please click on the link in the description. Thank you again and have an awesome day. Bye now.